From the heart of Capitol Hill to the nation and the world, get the inside story with Capitol Insider.
Mr. President, I'm going to be blunt. To be honest, I'm not even sure why I'm here. California is doing just fine, despite your administration constantly trying to get in our way. Our economy is already the 5th largest on the planet. We're out ahead of the rest of the country on climate change, diversity, and new technology. If you brought me here just because you're jealous that we're winning without your help, I really don't have time for this petty. Sit down, Gavin. President Trump's voice sliced right through Governor Gavin Newsom's rehearsed lines like a hot knife through butter. He wasn't yelling or even angry. He was just completely certain. It was the tone of a man who knew exactly how much leverage he had in that moment. It was a cold winter afternoon inside the Oval Office. Gavin Newsom stood before the Resolute desk in a $1,500 Tom Ford suit. His hair slicked back with enough gel to withstand a Category 5 hurricane, looking like he'd just walked off a GQ shoot for politicians who think they're Hollywood stars. He felt like he was completely untouchable. He was the governor of the biggest state in the country, the likely pick for the 2028 Democratic nomination, a media favorite, and the face of the whole resistance. He had no clue that for the last 8 months, Trump had secretly told the FBI and the Treasury to dig through every cent of California's budget. He didn't realize he was about to face proof that he'd been treating the entire state like his own personal racket. Standing behind Trump's desk was FBI Director Christopher Wray, holding a stack of thick, classified files. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent was there too, armed with financial audit reports. And HUD Inspector General Ray Oliver Davis stood ready with a breakdown of California's spending on the homeless. All three of them looked dead serious and strictly professional. This wasn't some routine policy talk. This was a trial. Newsom let out that rehearsed, arrogant laugh he always used when he thought he was better than everyone else, still trying to act confident before it all slipped away. Oh, please. Is this just some petty payback for 2020 political drama? I'm not intimidated by $68 billion. Trump didn't even have to raise his voice. He didn't need to. That number hit the room like an explosion. That is exactly how much California has blown on the homeless since you took over as governor in 2019. Do you want to know what actually happened to your homeless population during that time? Over those years, it actually went up by 46%. That's almost 50% more people out on the streets, even after spending $68 billion. He slid a heavy folder across the Resolute desk with just one finger. So I'm going to ask you one very simple question, Gavin. Where did that $68 billion go? Newsom's smug smile began to fracture, just a little bit, like a tiny crack appearing in expensive china. Trump didn't even wait for him to respond. I'll tell you exactly where it went. It went to your biggest donors, to nonprofits managed by your own fundraisers, and to consulting firms that funnel money right back into your political machine. You've been systematically robbing California taxpayers while people are out there literally dying on the sidewalk. While California was on fire, while families couldn't pay rent, and while the middle class was fleeing to other states, you were busy. You were stealing billions of dollars. He leaned in just a little closer. And I can prove every single word I'm saying. FBI Director Wray stepped up and opened his binder with the precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. Governor Newsom, for the last 8 months, the FBI has been auditing every single major homelessness contract California has signed since you stepped into office. We've found $23 billion in spending that is clearly fraudulent. He set the documents down on the desk right where Newsom could see them clearly. We have bank records, contract awards, and corporate filings showing state deals given to your top donors. Massive bills for services that never happened, fake consulting jobs, and kickbacks going straight to organizations you control. This isn't just a theory. We have the entire paper trail. Treasury Secretary Besant chimed in with her own evidence, her voice sounding sharp and official. Your family's wine businesses, Plumpjack, Odette, and Cade, have raked in $47 million in state contracts, tax breaks, and subsidies since you took office. That is the absolute definition of self-dealing. You used your power as governor to line your own pockets and help your private businesses. Under California law, that's a crime. Under federal law, that's fraud. HUD, Inspector General Davis delivered the knockout blow. We've also tracked $340 million in wire transfers from state contractors to shell companies that lead straight back to your political operation. Those aren't campaign donations. That is straight-up money laundering. That is organized fraud under federal law, and it's enough to trigger RICO charges. Trump let that one word just hang in the air. RICO, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. It's the very law used to bring down the most powerful mob bosses. So, Gavin, here is exactly how this is going to go down. And you need to listen very carefully, because the choice you make right now determines if you spend 6 years or the rest of your life behind bars. Newsom finally took his seat. His usually perfect posture had completely crumbled. He looked like someone who had just been given a terminal diagnosis. Option 1, Trump said, raising a single finger. You resign as the governor of California this very day. Effective immediately. You head back to Sacramento. You deal with corruption charges at the state level. You accept a plea bargain. You'll likely be sentenced to 10 years. You serve about 6 with good behavior. Your political career is over, but you're a free man before you turn 60. He lifted a second finger. Option 2. You walk right out that door. You refuse to step down. You think you can spin the story. You think your friends in the media will save you. And at 10 o'clock a.m. tomorrow morning, I'll stand in the Rose Garden and release this entire federal audit to the public. Every page, every contract, every wire transfer, and every shred of evidence. Then the Department of Justice hits you with RICO charges for running the state of California like a criminal organization. Trump's voice became quieter and more intimate. Under RICO, Gavin, you're looking at 25 years to life in a federal penitentiary. You'll be 70 years old before you're even eligible for parole. And federal prison isn't like one of those minimum security camps where white-collar criminals spend their time playing tennis. RICO defendants go to real, hard-time prisons. He paused to let that image really sink in. Remember that dinner at the French Laundry, where you ignored your own COVID rules while telling everyday Californians they couldn't see their families? That was child's play. That was just you being a hypocrite. It made you look bad for a few news cycles. This is something else entirely. This is you being a common thief. This is about you pocketing billions of dollars while the state of California was literally on fire. While people were sleeping in tents on the streets of Skid Row. While families were fleeing the state because they could no longer afford to survive there. Newsom looked as though he'd been hit with a physical blow. His face had turned a ghostly pale. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair like a vice. "There's no way you can prove," he started, his voice weak. "We have every single contract," Trump replied flatly. "We have the bank records. We have the wire transfers. We have sworn testimony from the very contractors who were funneling kickbacks into your operation. We gave them immunity, and they are cooperating fully. We have the financial statements from your wine business that show illegal state contracts. We have the emails. We have the text messages. We have 8 full months of FBI investigation. This isn't a bluff, Gavin. This is the real deal. He leaned back in his chair, totally at ease, like a poker player who knew he was holding a royal flush. So, what's it going to be? Do you resign quietly and face the state charges, or do you get destroyed in federal court and spend the rest of your life in a cell? Newsom's perfectly manicured hair didn't look so perfect anymore. That $1,500 suit no longer made him look powerful. He looked small, terrified, and cornered, as if the presidential dreams he'd been building for years had just vanished into thin air. Trump let out a slight smile. It wasn't a cruel look, just the face of a man who was satisfied. Let me show you exactly what we uncovered, starting with where $68 billion really went. Because once you lay eyes on this evidence, you'll realize you have no other choice but to step down. He gave a nod to FBI Director Wray. Show him everything. And as Wray opened the first binder, Gavin Newsom realized with absolute certainty that his life in politics was finished. The only remaining question was whether he would spend 6 years in state prison or the rest of his life in a federal cell. To understand how we reached this point, how California's golden boy ended up staring down RICO charges, you have to go back. Just 12 hours earlier, Newsom had woken up that morning feeling absolutely invincible. 12 hours ago, Gavin Newsom was in his private study at the governor's mansion in Sacramento, sipping an expensive espresso while scrolling through political headlines, latest polls, and glossy profiles of himself. His approval rating among California Democrats was sitting at 73%. His national profile was higher than almost any other governor, with the possible exception of DeSantis. He was supposed to be the future. Then his phone buzzed with a reminder for his afternoon meeting. White House, 3:00 p.m. Urgent discussion regarding federal-state program coordination. He had received the call 2 days earlier from Trump's chief of staff. It was very formal and strictly official, but offered 0 details beyond the meeting time and a vague subject line. That was unusual, but it wasn't cause for alarm. Relations between the state and the feds were always a battle with Trump in office. He figured it was probably about sanctuary cities or California's strict climate rules that went way beyond federal mandates. Or perhaps it was just Trump wanting to make a public show out of immigration. His chief of staff, Jennifer, spoke up. Yes. His wife walked into the study, clutching her tablet. You've got to head out for the airport in an hour. Do we actually have a strategy ready for this White House meeting? Newsom gave a dismissive wave, his eyes still glued to his phone. Trump is completely falling apart. His approval rating in California is what? 32%, the lowest for any Republican president in our state's history. He knows I'm the front runner for 2028, and it's driving him absolutely out of his mind. This is nothing but a desperate attempt to intimidate me before I officially launch my campaign. The summons specifically mentioned a federal audit targeting various state programs. Jennifer noted that her legal instincts were telling her to be cautious. That specific phrasing could suggest that there's something substantive behind it. Newsom finally glanced up from his device, flashing that trademark confident grin that had carried him through elections for 20 years. Look, federal audits happen all the time. It's just bureaucratic background noise. We've got an entire floor of lawyers whose whole job is to manage compliance. If Trump honestly believes his team is going to find some smoking gun in California's books, he's more out of touch than I realized. He stood up, stretched, and caught his reflection in the mirror hanging on the wall. He was still in great shape at 57. He still had the style, the hair, the sharp jaw, and that undeniable charisma. He'd been labeled the best-looking politician in America so many times, it didn't even feel like a compliment anymore. It was simply a fact. "Sure, California's budget is complicated," he continued. "It's the biggest state economy in the country, but every cent is documented and defensible. We've got the receipts for everything." His communications director popped up on the tablet via video call. "Do we need to get some defensive talking points ready, just in case there's something specific?" "Just prepare the standard responses," Newsom instructed. "Call it federal overreach. Frame it as Trump attacking California because we lead the way on climate and immigration. Mention Republican intimidation of Democratic governors. But honestly, I'm not worried about this one bit. This whole thing is just theater." What Newsom didn't see coming, and what he never would have guessed, was that in the months leading up to this, President Trump had become personally fixated on California's homelessness crisis. It wasn't even about the politics. The sheer numbers offended his sensibilities as a businessman. How on earth do you burn through $68 billion only to make the situation worse? Trump had quietly ordered a full-scale investigation, a real deep-dive investigation. He had the FBI, Treasury, HUD, and the Inspector General involved, issuing subpoenas to contractors, performing forensic audits of bank records, and cutting immunity deals for those ready to talk. They were building a case the same way you'd take down an organized crime syndicate, because that's exactly what Trump suspected it was. Organized crime, only with better suits and wine tastings instead of dive bars. That very morning, at 6:00 a.m., President Trump sat in the White House Situation Room alongside his investigative team. This was the secure bunker deep beneath the West Wing. No phones were permitted, and no recordings were made. It was strictly for those with a need to know. FBI Director Christopher Wray was seated to Trump's right, with 3 massive binders stacked in front of him. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent sat across the table, armed with financial forensic reports. HUD Inspector General Ray Oliver Davis was at the far end, holding the statistical analysis. The White House counsel sat beside her, clutching the legal strategy documents. The table was buried in evidence: flow charts of money, contract awards, bank statements, wire transfers, and transcripts of testimony. 8 months of digging had been condensed into a case designed to bring down a governor. Trump seemed energetic despite the early hour. He thrived on this sort of work, tracking the money, rooting out corruption, and putting together an airtight case. This was exactly what he'd done in the business world for 50 years before entering politics. "Walk me through the whole thing one more time," he said. "I want to be certain we've got him dead to rights before this meeting." HUD. Inspector General Davis cleared her throat and began. She was a seasoned auditor. She had spent 3 decades tracking government funds. To her, this was the most massive fraud case she had ever come across. "Mr. President, we've finished the comprehensive audit you requested 8 months back. It covers California's homelessness spending since Gavin Newsom took office in January 2019. The numbers are honestly mind-blowing." She brought up a chart on the secure monitor. Total spending hit $68 billion across all state and local programs funded by the state. And that's not just a guess. That is hard spending. We can verify directly through state budget records. During that very same time frame, she continued, California's homeless population shot up from roughly 151,000 to 181,000. That represents a 46% increase. Even after spending $68 billion, there are 46% more people living on the streets. Trump just shook his head. How is that even possible? You could have literally built every single homeless person a house for that kind of cash. Exactly right, Davis replied. So we dug into where the money actually went. We looked at every single contract over $1 million. What we uncovered is a level of systematic fraud that I haven't seen in 30 years of auditing the government. She tapped over to the next slide detailing the contract audits. A staggering $23 billion flowed into deals riddled with obvious red flags. Massive no-bid contracts were handed out to companies run by Newsom's top donors. The billing rates were completely off the charts. We're talking prices marked up 3, 4, or even 5 times the going market rate. Payments were cut for services that were never actually provided. Empty shell companies with zero staff were raking in millions in state funds. High-priced consulting deals resulted in absolutely no reports or results. FBI Director Wray took over, his voice carrying the authority of a seasoned mob prosecutor. What we've uncovered here is a full-blown criminal enterprise. Here is how the scheme works. Wealthy individuals or corporations pour huge donations into Newsom's campaigns or his favored PACs. Those same contributors are then rewarded with lucrative state contracts, often through non-competitive bidding. They then charge the state way more than the actual market rate. A chunk of that extra cash is then funneled back to political groups that Newsom either runs or benefits from. He displayed a complex flow chart on the screen. It is a perfectly closed loop. You give money to Newsom. You get back a state contract worth 10 times your initial gift. You submit wildly inflated invoices. You kick that money back through fake consulting fees, speaking gigs, or PAC donations. This is textbook money laundering. It is blatant fraud. It is an organized criminal operation. Let me walk you through one specific case that highlights the entire pattern. Wray pushed forward. Take Tom Steyer, the billionaire climate activist and one of Newsom's most loyal financial backers. Steyer's investment firm holds a massive stake in a nonprofit called California Housing Solutions. Since 2020, that single nonprofit has been handed $340 million in state contracts to fight homelessness. He paused to let that massive figure sink in. $340 million. We took a hard look at what they actually produced for that money. They built just 400 housing units over a 4-year period. That comes out to a staggering $850,000 per individual unit. Now, market rates for similar housing in California, and we know it's pricey there, usually sit around $200,000 a unit. So, where did that extra $650,000 per unit actually go? Wray pulled up the digital wire transfer trail. We followed every cent. Most of it was funneled to consulting firms run by Newsom's inner circle, lobbying groups pushing his agenda, and his own political network. The money just moved in a circle. State funds to Steyer's nonprofit, then from the nonprofit to Newsom's allies. Finally, those allies used it to prop up Newsom's political ambitions. Treasury Secretary Besant took the floor for the next part, delivering a financial breakdown that was both precise and devastating. Beyond the corruption with outside contractors, we've found proof of Governor Newsom directly enriching himself. Since he took office, his family's wine empire has pocketed $47 million through state deals, tax breaks, and farm subsidies. She presented the numbers with the cold precision of a veteran hedge fund pro. The Plumpjack Group, which owns Plumpjack, Odette, and Cade wineries, landed a $12 million deal to serve wine at official state events. Odette Estate alone pulled in $10 million in water credits and farm subsidies. Cade Winery was granted $17 million in tax credits, supposedly for going green and using sustainable methods. California's own ethics laws, specifically Section 190, strictly forbid officials from profiting from contracts they have power over. Newsom broke that rule time and time again, barely even bothering to cover his tracks. He simply bet on the fact that no one would ever check his math. The White House counsel then stepped up to lay out the legal attack plan. We have several different ways to prosecute this. The most direct path is using federal RICO statutes. The Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act was created for the very purpose of taking down criminal systems like this one. Essentially, Newsom has been running the California state government like a criminal syndicate to fund himself and his cronies. A RICO conviction carries a sentence of 25 years to life. Alternatively, we could stick to standard fraud charges. We have wire fraud for every time that money moved across state lines electronically. That alone is a serious federal offense. We have mail fraud for the physical contract paperwork, not to mention conspiracy and making false statements. Each of those counts can put him away for 10 to 20 years. He took a brief pause. Still, there's a real political benefit to giving him an exit. Let him step down, face California state charges, and take a plea for maybe 10 years with 6 served. That path removes him from power, kills his career, and avoids a massive media circus in federal court. But if he tries to fight us or spin the story, we pull the trigger on RICO and wipe him off the map entirely. Trump sat back and processed it all, his business instincts sharp as ever. At the end, he hit them with the only question that actually counted. How airtight is the evidence? I don't want to hear about probables. I don't want to hear maybe. I need to know that if we pull the trigger on RICO, we win. Can we get the conviction? Director Wray didn't blink. The paper trail is bulletproof. We have hundreds of fraudulent contracts ready to go. We've got the bank records to prove the money laundering. We have testimony from contractors who were part of the kickback schemes. We gave them immunity, and they're cooperating fully. We have financial records from Newsom's wine businesses showing illegal state contracts. We've got the emails and texts between Newsom's staff and the contractors. If we hit him with a RICO charge, we win. Guaranteed. Trump nodded slowly, wearing that calculating look on his face that negotiators had learned to fear. All right, here's the plan. I'll bring him in this afternoon. I'm going to show him everything we have. I'm giving him exactly one chance to resign quietly and face state charges. If he takes it, fine. If he refuses, if he walks out of here thinking he can spin this or that, his media friends will protect him. Then tomorrow morning I release everything and we file federal RICO charges. He looked around the table at his team. California has become a total disaster under this guy. The highest taxes in the country, the worst homelessness, the highest cost of living, and the highest poverty rate when you adjust for housing, with businesses and families fleeing to Texas and Florida in record numbers. Rolling blackouts, water shortages, rising crime. And now we know exactly why he's been stealing the money instead of fixing the problems. Trump's voice turned cold. This ends today. Either he resigns, or we destroy him. But one way or another, California gets a new governor. That afternoon, Gavin Newsom's motorcade pulled up to the White House. He stepped out looking like $1 million, which was ironic given what he'd stolen. Expensive suit, perfectly tailored, hair immaculate, and a confident stride. He even waved at the small group of cameras that his own communications team had alerted to his arrival. He was escorted through the West Wing, expecting a contentious but standard meeting about federal versus state authority, immigration, and climate regulations. The usual partisan battles that would provide fuel for fundraising emails. He walked into the Oval Office and immediately felt something was wrong. Trump wasn't sitting with policy advisors or political staff. He was behind the resolute desk with FBI Director Wray, Treasury Secretary Bessent, and HUD Inspector General Davis. All three had official binders with classification markings. This wasn't a policy meeting, but Newsom was committed to his plan. He launched into his prepared opening remarks about California's success, economic growth, climate leadership, and resisting federal overreach. The speech he'd been planning since the flight from Sacramento. Trump let him talk for about 90 seconds, then cut him off mid-sentence. "Sit down, Gavin." The tone stopped Newsom cold. It wasn't angry or loud. It was just absolute. It was the voice of someone who held all the cards and knew it. "Because we're not here to debate policy. I'm about to show you 8 months of federal investigation proving you've been systematically stealing from California taxpayers. And when I'm done, you're going to make a choice that determines whether you spend 6 years or the rest of your life in prison." Newsom's confident smile died on his face. He looked at Trump, at FBI Director Wray, and at those binders full of evidence, then slowly sat down. "What are you talking about?" His voice had lost all its confidence. Trump's answer was cold and factual. $68 billion spent on homelessness since you became governor. A 46% increase in the homeless population. I'm going to show you exactly where that money went. To your donors, to your wine businesses, and to your political machine. You've been running California like a criminal enterprise. He leaned forward slightly, and I can prove every word of it. FBI Director Wray stood up and moved toward a presentation screen that had been set up in the Oval Office. He clicked his remote, and a simple chart appeared showing California's homelessness spending over 6 years. "Governor Newsom, let me walk you through what we found. In January 2019, when you took office, California's documented homeless population was approximately 151,000 people. That was already the highest in the nation. Your campaign promised to address this crisis. You called it a moral imperative." He clicked to the next slide showing the spending. Over the next 6 years, from 2019 through 2024, California spent a documented $68 billion on homelessness programs. That includes federal funds, state funds, and local funds pulled from state budgets. $68 billion. Next slide. Current homeless population in California, approximately 181,000. That's an increase of 30,000 people, a 46% increase, despite spending $68 billion. Wray let those numbers hang in the air. The math was devastating. More money, more homelessness. Where did the money go? We asked that question. Wray continued. So, we did a deep dive into every single contract over $1 million, every major homeless service provider, every nonprofit, every consulting firm, and every construction company. We tracked down bank records, emails, corporate filings, and even got testimony from people inside the system. He clicked through the presentation to show the full breakdown. Out of that $68 billion, about $45 billion actually went toward what you'd call legitimate services. We're talking shelters, food programs, mental health support, and substance abuse treatment. Whether those programs were actually effective is one thing, but at least the money was being spent on real services. The remaining $23 billion, however, went into contracts that are riddled with red flags for fraud. Let me show you exactly what I mean. He pulled up the very first example on the screen. California Housing Solutions. This is a nonprofit that hauled in $340 million in state contracts between 2020 and 2024. Their official state mission is to build supportive housing for people experiencing homelessness. They reported finishing 400 units over those 4 years. Rye did the math right there in public. If you divide $340 million by 400 units, you get $850,000 per unit. For context, the going market rate for similar supportive housing in California, even in pricey spots like San Francisco or LA, is only around $200,000 per unit. These units weren't exactly high-end luxury apartments. They were just basic studio units with shared common areas. He flipped to photos of the finished buildings. They're simple and functional, but there is no way they are worth $850,000 each. So, where did the other $650,000 per unit actually go? We subpoenaed the financial records for California Housing Solutions. We followed the money trail, and here is exactly what we uncovered. A flowchart popped up on the screen showing how the money moved. California Housing Solutions funneled $280 million to various consulting firms and subcontractors. So we started looking into those specific companies. Most of them are owned by people or groups directly tied to your political network. Governor, from former campaign staff and major donors to political consultants who've worked for you. He clicked through a few more specific cases. Sustainable Future Consulting was paid $47 million just for project management. That company only has 3 employees. The owner, Marcus Webb, was your deputy campaign manager back in 2018 and has maxed out his donations to your campaigns every single year. What exactly did his company provide for that $47 million? We interviewed him under oath. He couldn't point to any specific results other than strategic oversight. Then there's Green Development Partners, who took $62 million for environmental compliance consulting. The owner of that firm donated $150,000 to your campaigns. We asked to see their actual work on environmental compliance. All they produced were a few generic reports that could have been knocked out in a weekend. $62 million. Rye walked through 5 more examples just like those. Every single one followed the exact same script. A nonprofit gets a massive state contract. That nonprofit then pays inflated fees to consulting firms owned by Newsom's donors or associates. Finally, that money just vanishes into the political network. And this is just from one single nonprofit. Ray noted, "We've seen this same pattern play out across dozens of different organizations. State funds flow to these nonprofits. Those nonprofits pay huge fees to consultants with political ties. Then, those consultants donate that money right back to your campaigns or the PACs supporting you." He brought up a summary chart. In total, we can document $23 billion following this specific pattern. That is billion, with a B. $23 billion went into contracts showing clear signs of fraud, with a huge chunk of it ending up right back in your political operation. Newsom tried to cut him off. Those are independent organizations. I don't control what nonprofits do. But you do control who gets the contracts, Ray said bluntly. Your administration is the one choosing which nonprofits get state funding. And somehow the nonprofits getting the biggest checks are the ones run by your political allies, who then hire consultants that donate to you. That's not just a coincidence. That is a kickback scheme. Treasury Secretary Bessent then stepped in, pulling up the financial records for Newsom's own business interests. Let's talk about how you've personally enriched yourself, Governor. You come from a wealthy family. You've always been very open about that. Your business interests include the Plumpjack Group, which is a collection of wineries, restaurants, and hotels throughout California. she displayed the corporate filings. When you took office, you put your business interests into a blind trust. That is the standard protocol. The idea is that the trust is managed independently, so you aren't making state decisions that benefit your own businesses. However, we've discovered that your businesses have seen some pretty extraordinary benefits from the state since you became governor. Take the first example. Plump Jack Winery landed a $12 million contract to be the wine supplier for state functions and events. This deal was signed in 2010, during your second year as governor. The contract specifically requires Plump Jack products for all major state events, dinners at the governor's mansion, celebrations, and even gifts for visiting dignitaries. Besant then showed the market comparisons. We reached out to wine industry experts and other potential suppliers. In California, the going rate for similar wine service contracts usually lands between $1 and $2 million a year, depending on the scale. Yet, your winery raked in $12 million over just 3 years. That is essentially twice the standard market price. But things get even more suspicious from here. She kept digging, pulling up one tax record after another. Odette Estate Winery, another piece of your business empire, secured $18 million in water credits and ag subsidies from the state between 2020 and 2024. She laid out the actual subsidy paperwork for everyone to see. The official excuse was that this money supported drought conservation and sustainable farming. However, when we looked at what other wineries in your area were getting, the math didn't add up. Most similar operations only saw about $1 million in subsidies during that same time frame. Your winery, on the other hand, walked away with $18 million. That's a staggering 18 times more than the average. Then, we have the situation at Cade Winery. Besant kept pressing forward without missing a beat. It pulled in $17 million in state tax credits, supposedly for going green. We're talking solar panels, water recycling systems, and energy-efficient gear. Now, these are real programs meant to help the environment. But then she revealed the actual work that was done. According to the contractor, the solar setup at Cade only cost about $4 million. That water system added another $3 million to the tab. So the total for the actual upgrades was around $7 million. Yet, the winery was handed $17 million in tax credits for it. So, where exactly did that extra $10 million go? Newsom looked like he'd seen a ghost. As his face went white, he stammered that state agencies are the ones running those programs. He claimed he doesn't sign off on them personally, but he's the one who appoints the people in charge. Besant cut him off right there. You're the one calling the shots, and somehow your businesses are getting way more cash and perks than anyone else in the industry. The law in California Government Code Section 190 is black and white. Public officials aren't allowed to have a stake in contracts that their own offices have a say in. You've broken that rule over and over again. Then, she put the grand total on the screen. Altogether, your wine labels have pocketed $47 million in state deals and tax breaks since you took office. Your companies were already making money, but this taxpayer cash padded your bottom line and your family's personal fortune. FBI Director Reyes stepped back in with the proof of a much larger corruption scheme. Let's break down the actual blueprint for how your political machine operates. We took a hard look at the donations flowing into your campaigns and PACs, then matched them up with who was winning state contracts. The connection between the two is impossible to ignore. He pulled up a massive database to illustrate his point. We tracked down your biggest 50 donors from 2019 through 2024. These people and corporations funneled a total of $83 million into your campaigns and supporting organizations. Moving to the next slide. Well, those exact same 50 donors saw their companies land state contracts worth about $4.7 billion. That means they got $56 back for every single dollar they donated. That isn't just politics as usual. That is a high-yield business investment. He started pointing out some very specific cases. Take Jeremy Stoppelman, a tech guy who gave $850,000 to your political causes between 2019 and 2023. In return, his company was handed a $340 million contract to build a tech platform for homeless services. Even though the platform was 3 years late and doesn't even work, state auditors say he got his money anyway. Then there's Patricia Bates, a real estate developer who put $1.2 million into your machine. Her company ended up with $680 million in contracts for affordable housing projects. She only finished about 40% of the work, but she'd already pocketed 90% of the cash before the state finally pulled the plug. And of course, she kept every penny. Martin Chang, who owns a construction firm, donated $2.4 million to various groups that back you. His reward was $1.8 billion in state housing and infrastructure contracts. When we actually audited the jobs he did, the results were shocking. Only about 30% of the work actually met state standards. Everything else was either falling apart or unfinished. Yet, he was paid in full. Ray pointed out that this same pattern repeated across all 50 major donors. This is a textbook, systematic pay-to-play scheme. You donate to Newsom. You land a state contract worth way more than your gift. You turn in bad work or nothing at all. You get the check anyway. And then you donate all over again for the next election. We also followed the money trail after these contractors got their payouts. Ray kept going, bringing up one wire transfer after another. A lot of that cash was sent right back to consulting firms and lobbyists that we've linked directly to your political inner circle. It's essentially a massive money laundering operation. State money goes to contractors. Those contractors pay the consultants. And then those consultants fund your campaigns. He highlighted some very specific wire transfers to prove it. Johnson Construction took $440 million from the state budget. Just 3 months later, they cut an $18 million check to a firm called Strategic Political Advisors, which is run by your former chief of staff. Strategic Political Advisors then poured money into independent ads to boost your campaigns. It was essentially a giant financial loop. Then, Inspector General Davis stepped forward to present the evidence of your lavish lifestyle. Governor, the American public is well aware of that dinner at the French Laundry in November 2020. You attended a lobbyist's birthday party at one of California's most expensive restaurants, while the state was under the strict COVID lockdowns you personally ordered. That single meal reportedly cost $15,000. You eventually apologized and claimed it was just a lapse in judgment. Then, she pulled up the financial records. What the public doesn't know is that the California Medical Association, a powerful lobbying group, actually picked up the tab. Legally speaking, that is a gift. Under California law, you are required to report any gift worth more than $500. You didn't bother reporting this one. But that dinner was nothing compared to the ongoing pattern of your luxury lifestyle being funded by others. She presented credit card records that had been obtained through a subpoena. Between 2019 and 2024, you and your wife hit up roughly 180 high-end dinners, where the average bill exceeded $1,000. Based on reservation logs and witness accounts, you only personally paid for about 40 of those meals. The other 140 were covered by associates, donors, or lobbying groups. She broke down the math for everyone. If you assume a conservative average of $2,000 per dinner for places like those, that's $280,000 in unreported gifts over 6 years. Every single one of those should have been disclosed under state ethics laws. Not a single one was. Then we have the travel, Davis continued. You've been taking countless trips to elite luxury destinations. That includes wine tastings in Napa Valley, ski trips to Lake Tahoe, and fly fishing in Montana. According to travel logs, many of these getaways involved private jets or first-class commercial flights paid for by other people. Even your stays at five-star hotels were all justified as political fundraising or relationship building. She displayed the actual receipts. We estimate about $340,000 in luxury travel over 6 years that was covered by donors or related entities. Some of that was reported as campaign expenses. A lot of it wasn't. And even the travel you did report makes people wonder if it was actual political work or just a personal vacation disguised as business. FBI Director Wray then shifted the focus back to the people who were actually being harmed. Governor Newsom, I want to show you something. We interviewed people living on the streets all across California. These are the people who should have been helped by that $68 billion. He played a video clip. A woman in her 50s, clearly homeless, was sitting on a sidewalk in Los Angeles. Her name was Jennifer Martinez. She used to be a public school teacher until medical bills from breast cancer wiped her out. I see the news about how much money the state is spending on homelessness, Jennifer told the camera. Billions of dollars, and yet I'm still sleeping on the street. I've been on waiting lists for supportive housing for 3 years now. 3 whole years? Where is all that money actually going? Because it certainly isn't helping me. Then another clip played. This one featured a military veteran named Marcus Johnson in San Francisco. I served this country for 12 years. I came home with PTSD and just couldn't hold down a job. I've been homeless for 4 years. I hear about all these programs and all this funding, but whenever I try to get help, there's nothing. Just waiting lists, forms that go nowhere, and shelters that are always full. If California is really spending billions on this, then somebody is stealing the money, because we aren't seeing it. Wray turned off the video. We've interviewed dozens of homeless individuals all across California. Their stories are always exactly the same. They hear about these massive spending bills. They see politicians talking about fixing the crisis, but they aren't getting help because the money isn't reaching them. It's flowing straight into your political network. He pulled up the mortality statistics. Homeless deaths in California have shot up 48% since you became governor. Those are real people dying on the pavement while you were stealing the funds that should have saved them. That isn't just corruption. Those are people literally dying because of your corruption. The White House counsel then laid out the federal prosecution strategy. Governor Newsom, let me explain the legal nightmare you're currently facing. The FBI and the Treasury Department have built a solid RICO case against you. RICO, or the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, was designed to take down systematic criminal enterprises like mob families and drug cartels. He displayed the legal requirements, noting that to prove RICO, prosecutors must show an ongoing organization, a pattern of illegal activity, and that the defendant was personally involved in running it. We can prove every single one of those elements against you. First, let's talk about the organization. That is your entire political machine, your campaigns, your allied PSAs, and the web of consultants, donors, and contractors who back you and profit from your position. Second is the pattern of racketeering. We've documented wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, bribery, and honest services fraud occurring repeatedly over the last 6 years. That is more than enough to establish a pattern. Third, we have your direct participation. As governor, you are the one in control. You dictate contract awards through your personal appointments. You have personally raked it in through your wine businesses. You signed off on policy decisions that were specifically designed to help your donors. You didn't just participate in this enterprise, you directed it. He then pointed to the federal sentencing guidelines. RICO carries a sentence of 25 years to life in federal prison. Given that this fraud involves billions of dollars, you would be looking at the maximum end of that range. Prosecutors would almost certainly recommend life in prison, considering the massive scale and duration of this criminal enterprise. We would also move to seize every one of your assets. That includes the $47 million your businesses illegally pocketed, plus any other assets we can prove were funded by criminal proceeds. You would be left penniless while spending the rest of your life behind bars. Trump had been sitting there quietly, letting his team lay out the evidence. Now he spoke up, his voice ringing with absolute authority. So, Gavin, that is what you are up against. Life in federal prison and total financial collapse. Your legacy will be that of one of the most corrupt governors in American history. Your name will become synonymous with stealing from the homeless while people were dying in the streets. He leaned in and said, "Or you take the deal. You step down today. You face state-level charges in California. You plead out to maybe 10 years. With good behavior, you're out in 6. You'll be free by your early 60s. Your businesses will stay intact. Your family gets to keep most of their wealth. You get to fade away instead of being utterly destroyed." Trump gestured with his hands. "That's the offer. Take it or leave it. But you have to decide this second, because if you leave without resigning, this meeting never happened, and I will destroy you publicly tomorrow morning." Newsom sat there in silence, his mind searching for an exit that wasn't there. Every scenario he ran led to the exact same conclusion. The evidence against him was just too much. Trump had him backed into a corner. The only real question left was state or federal prison, 6 years or a lifetime. Either way, his career in politics was finished. His dreams of the presidency were dead. The only choice remaining was how much more he was willing to lose. "I need to speak with my attorneys," Newsom said in a low voice. "No," Trump replied flatly. "You decide right here in this room. You resign and deal with the state, or you fight us and face federal RICO charges. Which is it going to be?" The silence in the Oval Office hung heavy for nearly a full minute. Gavin Newsom sat motionless, his perfectly styled hair now a mess from him constantly running his hands through it. His high-end suit suddenly felt like it was choking the life out of him. It felt as though the very walls of the Oval Office were closing in on him. 2 hours ago, he'd walked in feeling completely invincible. He was the future president, the golden child of the Democratic Party. And now, he was weighing state prison against federal time, 6 years against life, and a quiet exit against total destruction. "I need more time," he finally managed to whisper. "No," Trump's voice was final. "You decide right now, because once you step out that door, the deal is dead. You resign this second, or I release every bit of this and file federal charges tomorrow morning." FBI Director Wray chimed in, his tone sounding almost sympathetic. "Governor, I've been in this business for 30 years. I've seen men in your exact position before. The evidence is just insurmountable. You cannot win this fight. There is no way to spin this. The bank records tell the truth. The wire transfers don't lie. The witness testimony doesn't lie. You are going to prison. The only thing left to decide is which one, and for how long? Newsom glanced around at every person in the room. There was Trump, looking totally at ease behind the resolute desk. There was Ray, with binders overflowing with evidence. Besant held financial records that were impossible to justify. Davis had the statistics showing the human cost, while Newsom siphoned off billions. The White House counsel stood ready with the full RICO prosecution plan. He had zero leverage, no escape route, and not a single card left to play. "If I step down," he asked slowly, "what exactly would the state charges be?" Trump nodded toward the White House counsel, who had already been in touch with California's Attorney General. "The California AG has been fully briefed on what we've found. They will charge you with several counts of fraud, embezzlement, and public corruption under state law. Then you'll negotiate a plea deal. Given the massive amounts of money involved and your willingness to flip on others in your network, you'll likely plead to 5 counts, take a 10-year sentence, and end up serving about 6 with good behavior at a minimum security state prison. Your wine businesses will stay open. They weren't directly part of the criminal operation. They simply reaped the rewards. Your family gets to keep most of their wealth, except for what the state requires in restitution. You'll probably be on the hook for 20 to 30 million in fines and restitution, but you'll walk away financially intact. Most importantly," the counsel added, "this stays at the state level. No federal RICO charges, no life sentence. You do 6 years. You're out by your early 60s. You can live a quiet life somewhere and just fade away. That is the absolute best possible outcome for you right now." Newsom knew he was finished and had no other choice, but his ego forced him to take one last shot. "This is nothing but a political hit job. You're only doing this because I'm your opposition. Because California is the one place resisting your agenda. I'm doing this because you're a common thief," Trump cut him off, his voice turning cold and sharp. "You pocketed billions while people were literally dying on the sidewalk. This has nothing to do with politics. This is about you being a criminal, and it's time you face the consequences. The only real question is if you're smart enough to take the better deal." Trump took a quick look at his watch. "You have exactly 60 seconds to make up your mind. After that, the offer is gone, and tomorrow you'll face the full weight of the feds." That minute felt like an eternity. Newsom thought about his dreams of the White House. They were dead. His political career was over. His reputation was in tatters. His freedom was about to vanish for years. Everything he had ever built, everything he had spent his life working for was gone. All because he couldn't control his greed. All because he actually thought he was above the law. All because he started believing his own hype. "I'll resign," he finally muttered, the words feeling like poison as they left his lips. Trump didn't rub it in. He just gave a simple nod. "Smart move. You're going to write up a resignation letter. It goes live tonight. You can blame it on personal reasons or family health, whatever story you need to tell. But as of tonight, your time as governor is finished." He stood up, making it clear the meeting was over. "The California Attorney General will be in touch with your legal team tomorrow. You'll work out the details of your plea. And Gavin, don't even think about running. Don't try to fight this, because if you do, everything goes public, and the feds will come for you anyway. Own up to it. Do your time. And maybe by the time you're out, you'll finally understand that public service is about the people, not yourself." Newsom stood up on weak legs, walked toward the exit, and turned back one last time. "For what it's worth, I really did try to help people when I started. I'm sure you did, Trump replied. But at some point, you started looking out for yourself instead. And that's the moment you became a criminal. Gavin Newsom walked out of the Oval Office a completely broken man. His security detail led him straight to his waiting car. He sat in the back seat on the way to his hotel, staring blankly out the window. His mind was reeling as he tried to grasp that his life as he knew it was effectively over. At 11:00 p.m. Eastern that night, Newsom's office put out a statement. The governor announced his immediate resignation, citing family and personal health issues. Lieutenant Governor Eleni Kounalakis was scheduled to be sworn in the following day. The political world went into a total meltdown. Rumors and theories spread like wildfire. Why would the governor of California, the man everyone expected to run for president in 2028, suddenly quit over family health? Personal reasons. No one was buying it. Clearly, something big had gone down. But while the world wondered, Trump stayed silent, refusing to take a victory lap or even comment, just letting the tension build. 2 days later, California Attorney General Rob Bonta called a press conference. My office has been handed evidence from federal investigators concerning massive corruption in our state's homelessness spending. We are officially filing criminal charges against former Governor Gavin Newsom for fraud, embezzlement, and public corruption. These charges involve roughly $23 billion in fraudulent contracts and self-dealing. Then, the ugly details started coming out. There were pay-to-play schemes, wine businesses getting illegal kickbacks, and donors winning contracts only to funnel money back to Newsom. All the while, the homeless crisis just got worse, as billions of dollars vanished into thin air. The California media, which had always protected Newsom, turned on him with the absolute fury of people who realized they'd been played. The Los Angeles Times published a crushing investigative report. Where did $68 billion go? How Gavin Newsom stole from the homeless while they were dying in our streets. The San Francisco Chronicle was equally relentless. The French Laundry scandal was nothing compared to Newsom's multi-billion-dollar corruption ring. Even the most progressive outlets couldn't find a way to defend him. The evidence was just too overwhelming, the money was too much, and the human suffering was too visible to ignore. Newsom attempted a PR blitz, giving interviews where he claimed he was being targeted for his progressive views and that Trump had rigged the whole thing. But since the California AG was a fellow Democrat, the evidence was public, and the ongoing homeless crisis was visible to everyone. Nobody was buying it. His plea agreement finally came through in April. He pleaded guilty to 5 counts of fraud and public corruption, receiving a 10-year sentence in state prison with the potential to serve about 6 for good behavior. The judge was absolutely ruthless at the sentencing hearing. Mr. Newsom, you really did have it all. You had the wealth, the power, and a brilliant political future ahead of you. You actually had the chance to change people's lives for the better. Instead, you chose to steal from those who were most vulnerable. You lined your own pockets and rewarded your donors while people were literally dying on the streets. This is the most shameful betrayal of public trust I have encountered in my entire career. My only regret is that I cannot sentence you to more than 10 years. In May, Gavin Newsom was officially processed into California State Prison. He became inmate number S73849. He was assigned to the Solano State Facility. It's a medium-security prison located about 40 miles northeast of San Francisco. He went from the governor's mansion to a cramped cell, and from a presidential hopeful to a convicted felon. Once the shining future of the Democratic Party, he became a grim cautionary tale about political greed. Fast forward 5 years, And Gavin Newsom is still sitting in a cell in Solano. He's 62 years old now. That once perfect hair has turned completely gray. His famous leading man looks have withered away under harsh fluorescent lights and terrible prison food. He spends his days working in the prison library, which is one of the better assignments for nonviolent inmates. He will finally be eligible for parole in another year. He'll likely walk free at 63, having served 6 years of his 10-year sentence. His legal team is already grinding on the parole applications, highlighting his cooperation with the feds and his clean record behind bars. His wine empire barely managed to survive. It's been run by his family the entire time he's been locked up. They've scrubbed his name off of every piece of the business. Plumpjack was rebranded as Napa Valley Reserve in a desperate attempt to outrun the scandal. Sales plummeted by 60% immediately following his conviction, though they've managed to crawl back to about 75% of where they used to be. The businesses are still standing, but they will never regain their former glory. His personal fortune, once pegged at over $20 million, has been totally wiped out. He was forced to fork over $28 million in fines and restitution. On top of that, his legal fees drained another $8 million. He isn't exactly penniless, though. His family had plenty of money before his downfall, but his days of being truly wealthy are over. When he finally gets out, he'll likely have about $2 million left. That's enough to be comfortable, but it's a far cry from the life he once lived. It goes without saying that his political career is dead and buried. His name has become synonymous with corruption. The Newsom scandal is now a staple in political science classes, used as the textbook example of state-level graft. He's now mentioned in the same breath as infamous figures like Rod Blagojevich. The Democratic Party has completely cut ties, wiping him from their websites and returning any cash linked to him. By the 2028 election, every presidential candidate was running as far away from him as possible. Saying, "I never supported Newsom," became a mandatory talking point for every Democrat in California. Meanwhile, California has finally started to clean up its act. The new governor, Eleni Kounalakis, brought in strict oversight for homeless spending, mandating independent audits, and killing off no-bid contracts. The books are much more transparent now, even if the homeless crisis remains a disaster because so much money was siphoned off for years. His wife, Jennifer Siebel Newsom, filed for divorce just 6 months after he went away. She walked away with the remaining assets and custody of the kids. She's since remarried and went back to using her maiden name. Even the kids changed their last names to match their mothers. They never make the trip to see him in prison. To be honest, they want absolutely nothing to do with their father. Every once in a while, a journalist manages to track him down behind bars. They'll ask for an interview. He usually says no, but in late 2029, he finally agreed to talk to a reporter from the San Francisco Chronicle. The sit-down happened in a private room, with Newsom in his prison blues, looking like a ghost of the polished politician who used to be on every magazine cover. "Do you have any regrets?" the reporter asked. Newsom sat in silence for a long time. "I regret getting caught," he finally admitted. "That's the honest truth. Do I regret what I actually did? I'm not so sure. At the time, it didn't feel like I was stealing anything. It just felt like the way politics worked. You take care of your donors, and they take care of you. That's just how the machine runs. People were dying on the streets while you were pocketing billions. I know that. I think about it often. But I wasn't the one who killed them. They were homeless long before I ever became governor. I didn't start the homeless crisis. I just failed to fix it. And yeah, I took money that was meant for them. But let's be real. I wasn't the only one. The entire system is rotten to the core. I'm just the guy who got caught. Do you think you deserved a 10-year sentence? No. I feel like I was turned into a warning sign just because Trump wanted to take down California's Democratic leaders. I'm just as much a political prisoner as I am a common criminal. The reporter pushed back. The California Attorney General who brought the charges is a Democrat. The judge who handed down your sentence was appointed by a Democrat. The jury that would have found you guilty if you hadn't taken a plea deal consisted of everyday California voters. This wasn't Trump's doing. This was the people of California saying they'd had enough of your corruption. Newsom had no real comeback for that. I suppose that's one way to look at it. Once you're out next year, what's the plan? I really don't know. A career in politics is off the table. I can't even practice law anymore. Even my own businesses have scrubbed my name. I'll likely just find a quiet spot to settle down. Maybe Montana. Somewhere I can just be a face in the crowd. Just live a simple life, fish, read, and fade away. You had your sights on the presidency. Yeah, I wanted a lot of things. It turns out I wanted power more than I wanted to be an honest man. The interview hit the stands with the headline, Gavin Newsom's Prison Confession. No true remorse, just more finger-pointing. Even the Chronicle, which was once a staunch ally, couldn't find a way to make him look like a victim. Meanwhile in D.C., President Trump was asked about Newsom during a press briefing on a completely different topic. Sir, Gavin Newsom is set for release next year. Do you have any thoughts on his conviction or the time he served? Trump gave a slight, knowing grin. Gavin Newsom robbed California taxpayers of billions of dollars. He lined his own pockets and those of his donors while people were literally dying on the streets. He was sentenced to 10 years. He'll end up doing 6. To be honest, I think he got a light sentence, but at least justice was done. He's behind bars where he belongs. California has a new governor now who's actually trying to solve problems instead of just looting the treasury. That's what really matters. Do you believe you're the one who crushed his presidential dreams? I didn't crush anything. He destroyed his own future the second he decided to become a crook. I simply made sure he had to answer for it. That's exactly what a president is supposed to do. We have to ensure that the powerful don't get a free pass just because of their status. Back in California, the homelessness crisis has seen some slight improvements. It's still the worst in the country, but at least the downward spiral has slowed. This new era of oversight and transparency is finally making a difference. Some of that stolen cash has been clawed back and is actually funding real help. You'll still see people on the streets in San Francisco and LA, but now the money meant for them is going towards services instead of vanishing into political slush funds. Jennifer Martinez, the former teacher who lost her home and was featured in the FBI's case against Newsom, finally has a roof over her head. She's living in a modest subsidized apartment in Los Angeles. When she was asked about Newsom's time in prison, she remarked, "6 years just isn't enough. He stole billions while we were out there suffering, but at least he's locked up. At least he actually had to face the music. That's a lot more than most corrupt politicians ever get." In 10 years, when Gavin Newsom is in his early 70s, his Wikipedia page is going to be a grim read. Gavin Newsom, born in 1967, is a former American politician who served as California's 40th governor from 2019 to 2025. He stepped down after proof surfaced of a massive corruption scheme involving $23 billion in fraudulent homelessness funds. He pleaded guilty to 5 counts of fraud and public corruption, ultimately serving a 6-year prison term. He is now remembered as one of the most corrupt governors to ever hold office in California. That will be his lasting legacy. It won't be about the progressive causes he championed, his polished look, or his White House dreams. He'll just be the corrupt governor who went to jail. And somewhere out in Montana or Idaho, wherever he lands after his release, Gavin Newsom will live a quiet life under a different name, fishing and reading, trying to forget he once thought he'd be the leader of the free world. He truly believed he was untouchable. He thought his charm, his looks, and his political pedigree made him special. He assumed the rules simply didn't apply to a man like him. He found out the hard way in the Oval Office when Trump laid out evidence that no amount of spin could fix. When he had to choose between a state cell or a federal one, his entire world crumbled in just 2 hours. The golden boy of California politics finished his career in a cold prison cell. It wasn't because of a Trump vendetta. It was because he was a thief who finally got caught. That's not a political hit job. That's called justice. And in the end, justice doesn't give a damn how good your hair looks.